As you probably noticed, 2020's been a pretty slow year for video games, mainly due to that dang old PBR virus running amok and delaying games left and right, especially on the Switch, which some people initially thought was just Nintendo making excuses, but with Cyberpunk being delayed and the Xbox Series X and PS5 being harder to find than my will to live, I think that most people are starting to believe that the above-average sized den really did have some big games in store for 2021 that simply got a raw deal thanks to the pandemic. But if 2020 was no good, then the most obvious question would be just when will Nintendo start putting their heavy hitters out? And given that Japan's a lot closer to normal than the rest of the world, I can confidently say that things are certainly moving along, and that we're definitely on track to get some really good stuff in 2021, and I'm pretty sure most people are thinking the same thing, but with the final mini-direct of 2020 already being in the books, many people are wondering just when exactly in 2021 will this phenomenon of new and original first-party Switch games actually start coming out. But while I may not legally be a qualified psychic anymore after a little snafu that I ran into, I've still got a pretty decent theory as to when these games are gonna start flowing, and if you keep watching, I just might tell you when that may be. It'll be in April. But if you want the specifics, I guess, then make sure to press that subscribe button to ensure that you'll see never-ending games, goofs, and glory, and allow me, the undefeated and tallest Little League boxing champion of my apartment complex, Cameron all one word, to tell you why Nintendo Switch games are gonna start flowing in April of 2021. So I've already talked about this a little bit in my other videos, but I think that Super Mario 3D All-Stars, Fire Emblem, and Super Mario 35 all being limited edition games is a pretty good indicator to me that Nintendo never wanted to release any of these games at all, and only did so because they needed to ensure that the Switch wouldn't fall off a cliff over the holidays just in case Pikmin 3, Hyrule Warriors, and all the existing games weren't enough to carry the load. Because as you may or may not know, most shareholders have absolutely no idea about anything at all, which is why the Labo announcement led to a $1 billion increase overnight, and Animal Crossing being delayed by 3 friggin' months led to a $1 billion decrease in the same amount of time. So honestly, I don't really blame Nintendo for trying to keep the numbers up as much as possible during a pandemic by releasing a bunch of games that wouldn't take them a whole lot of effort. And sure, people may complain about older games being re-released on the Switch again, but most of these same people are still gonna buy these games in droves, especially the ones that are limited edition, and then Nintendo could finally yank these games back that they never wanted us to have in the first place. I go into way more details as to why Nintendo doesn't want us to have these games in a video I made dedicated towards the topic that I'll link in the description and pin in the comments if you want to check it out. But the main thing that all these limited edition games have in common is that they're all gonna go away on March 31st, which begs the question of just why the frig Nintendo chose that specific date. Well, since they don't want us to have any of these games in the first place, and trust me, they really don't, then the only reason that could be is simply because they won't need these games to buy them any more time, which would obviously mean that Nintendo would have new and original games ready to go, and I'd even go an ass hair further and wager that Nintendo's got more than a normal year's worth of games. You see, back when Nintendo gave up on the Wii U, the poor thing didn't see any first-party games for like 87 years before Breath of the Wild finally came out, and the only reason why the Wii U got Breath of the Wild in the first place is because Nintendo had already promised it to all the people who bought the console years prior. But with all that extra time to work on new and original games, Nintendo finally started cranking them out once the Switch launched in early 2017, with Breath of the Wild along with a new 3D Mario game coming out within the same year, as well as some other games like Splatoon 2, ARMS, Xenoblade 2, and quite a few others as well. Personally, I think that's a pretty solid year for the Switch, even though some people were complaining early on at the time before Nintendo showed all their cards, but I'm sure there's still probably a few people who don't think that's enough games to justify such a long drought. But you've got to keep in mind that Nintendo was still trying to support the 3DS at the time, with new Pokemon, Metroid, Fire Emblem, Pikmin games, and more, all coming out in 2017 as well, but nobody seems to remember most of those games aside from Pokemon, because most people viewed the 3DS as old news at that point. But you know what, if all these games had come to the Switch, then I don't think there'd have been any denying that 2017's lineup would definitely justify the game drought, even if some of these games might have been more on the simplistic side, and despite the fact that the Wii U owners kinda got screwed over with there even being a drought in the first place. I know the drought of the Wii U's Twilight year was longer than the one caused by the PBR germs in 2020, but even though I'm not expecting the Switch's 2021 to have a schedule that's even more impressive than 2017's 3DS and Switch catalogs combined, I do still think that it'll be the best year to date for Nintendo's little hybrid that could, because while I don't doubt that Nintendo's development hasn't been running as smoothly as usual, I kind of find it hard to believe that it was really messed up to the point to where they only had one original game ready for 2020. Sure, the Wii U ports definitely took some effort, just like all the limited games did as well, but there's just no way that this was the best Nintendo could do all year, even under the circumstances. In fact, it wouldn't even surprise me if the Wii U ports were already at least mostly finished a long time ago and waiting on standby for Windows just like this to be plugged into the release schedule. But if these weren't the games that Nintendo have been working on all year, then I'm sure you're probably wondering what the real games could have been and why Nintendo would consciously hold them back if releasing them in 2020 were possible. And well, even though Switch consoles have gotten a little bit easier to find lately, I'd still imagine that there probably won't be as many floating around during the holidays as Nintendo would have liked there to be. So since the console is probably going to sell out everywhere regardless based on the current library, I'd imagine that Nintendo would rather keep the existing Switch owners busy with ports and remasters while they stockpile original games for 2021, with the idea being that it's better for the year with readily available hardware to be awesome rather than for both years to be average, and for the big games that come out during the year without any consoles to not be old news by the time people could actually buy Switches. Not to mention that it probably made 2020 a lot less stressful for all the developers too. As far as what the actual games are going to be though, well, I'm definitely not going to get that specific with my predictions, but if I had to guess, then I'd imagine that Breath of the Wild sequel would probably be ready, since Nintendo's been working on that game for almost as long as it took them to make the first one, despite the groundwork already being laid out. And given that we've gotten a new Pokemon game every other year for like the past 25 centuries, I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw a new Pokemon game either. I kinda got a feeling that we're gonna get Mario Odyssey 2 or something as well, but I don't know. All I'm saying is that Nintendo's got a lot of games cooking that'll definitely be a big deal, and that they're gonna start flowing in April, or June at the absolute latest, but I'm pretty sure that we'll at least hear about the flow of games by April, if not start actually getting them. But anyway, let me know when you think Nintendo's gonna start cranking goodies out in the comments below. Praise or ridicule me if you're watching this after April of 2021, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody at some point. But if you want to know why Nintendo doesn't want 64 Gamecube and Wii games on the Switch outside of the limited ones that they planned on yanking away from us all along, then be sure to watch my video explaining it if you're feeling saucy. Later.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.